लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके परम सुखाति आनंदन परम सुखाति आनंदन लागे लगन पति सके लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन पति सके परम सुखाति आनंदन परम सुखाति आनंदन लागे लगन पति सके धन लागे लगन
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kalapriya Foundation Center for Indian Performing Arts Signature Cultural Sundays program. We're very excited to have a sold-out webinar today. My name is Snigdha Acharya, and I've been a board member since 2019 because I believe in Kalapriya's mission to promote the importance and value of diversity. Through dance, music, theater, and storytelling, Kalapriya Foundation presents India's artistic diversity through performing arts to preserve traditional South Asian art forms and build bridges between the performing arts and our contemporary lives. Our references to India typically encompass the subcontinent that now contains 8 different political entities. They bring a common culture with many diverse influences. Cultural Sundays was started to create a community of people interested in learning and sharing the various aspects of Indian culture and finding relevance from global cultures to our contemporary lives. Since we began last autumn, we have covered a range of subjects from the early Indians who populated and created the civilization to the stories, the visual art, the music, the dance, and today the cinema. Kalapriya is creating a platform to educate, engage, and bind the Chicagoland community of diverse citizens. If you'd like to see any of our past webinars, please visit our website. Today, we are excited to discuss 3 visionary filmmakers of the 20th century, Ritwik Ghatak, Satyajit Ray, and Mrinal Sen. They are all from Bengal, which was one state until 1947 and continues to represent one cultural influence in 2 nations, India and Bangladesh. These iconic filmmakers were recognized by the world during their lives and continue to be relevant today, almost 50 years later. While Cultural Sundays are free to all, we do need your support to continue this important work. Any amount you can give will help us continue our mission. Please make a donation today at kalapriya.org. The link is also available in the chat box. And to the parents of elementary school children, Kalapriya has a very special summer camp called Journey Through South Asia, where children engage in fun activities highlighting the region. Please see the chat box for more information. To ensure our Cultural Sundays are relevant, we would love to hear from you. Your comments and suggestions are top of mind as we develop future programming. And now, I am delighted to introduce 2 people who knew these iconic filmmakers, lived through the launch of their films, and have personal anecdotes and recommendations to share with you. First, we have Dr. Kunal Sen, who grew up in a cultural milieu in Calcutta. His father, Mrinal Sen, was a filmmaker, and his mother, Geeta Sen, a stage and film actress. However, his interest drifted toward science. After obtaining a graduate degree in physics, he switched to computer science, made Chicago his home, and obtained his PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of Illinois in Chicago. After working in medical research for a few years, he joined Encyclopedia Britannica and served as its chief technology officer for the next 20 years. Currently, he is the head of technology at Morningstar, a global financial research company. For the last decade, Kunal has also established himself as a visual artist, working in various media, including electronic kinetic art. He is also the author of a number of textbooks in basic computer science. Kunal has recently donated his father's letters and archives to the University of Chicago, where they can be accessed and useful to future film scholars. Next, we have Dr. Gowri Ramnarayan. She spent most of her life in Chennai and has been working in the arts for over 5 decades. Gowri has had a long and distinguished career as a playwright, theater director, journalist, musician, and founder and artistic director of a theater company. Her witty, thought-provoking, and visually interesting plans make original use of poetry, music, dance, and paintings that present a rare amalgam of aesthetic and scholarship. She met and interviewed these visionary filmmakers during their prime and will share vignettes and insights into their personalities. Kalapriya is very fortunate to have Gowri support our mission of creating bridges with community partners like the Chicago Children's Choir and helping with Kalapriya's curricula for the Chicago Public Schools. Before they start their conversation, Kunal and Gowri have prepared a presentation to set the mood for you. Thank you so much for joining us today and enjoy the show.
you and Kalapriya for inviting me to participate in this event today. It is an absolute privilege to talk about Satyajit Ray anytime, anywhere, particularly now in 2021, the centenary year of the man who wore many hats as a film director, cinematographer, fiction writer, illustrator, graphic designer, and music composer. I wonder if there is any other filmmaker in the world who was so completely and totally responsible for all aspects of filmmaking as Ray was. As you will know, India is now in truly dire straits. The pandemic rages on, and every day our experts keep predicting new variants and a third wave. It is a Herculean effort to keep one's hopes up. And yet, Satyajit Ray's centenary has not been forgotten by film scholars or by film buffs or by the press. Every day there is an article about this or that aspect of Satyajit Ray's filmmaking, about interviews with his actors and his friends and so on. And what do you know? The aggressively pro-Hindutva Bharatiya Janata Party, the political party which is in power in India today, it used Satyajit Ray as part of its campaign, election campaign in Bengal, and promised that if they were elected to power, they would introduce a new award in Satyajit Ray's name, which would be as prestigious as the Oscars. Strange turnaround for a man who had been trounced for an anti-Hindu film, the film Devi or Goddess, as it is called in English, where he completely slammed religious bigotry. Today, Ray would have also been extremely amused to see that our government, which is usually very tardy in matters of cultural importance, has certainly shown great awakeness. It has declared year-long celebrations of Satyajit Ray's centenary. The ministries of information and broadcasting, external affairs, culture, our films division, every single organ of the government is now bent on producing virtual and physical events to celebrate Ray's centenary. Ray retrospectives, there will be an unveiling of Ray's statue, virtual exhibitions, and even intercollegiate competitions on themes from Ray's films. An annual Satyajit Ray Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Filmmaking has been announced by the government. Not bad for a man who struggled to manage to get some partial funding from the state government for his debut film, and which was granted solely because the bureaucrats who saw some of the rushes of the film thought that the film was a documentary on rural upliftment. The ledgers record that this grant was given to Pather Panchali, which means Song of the Little Road, for promoting road improvement schemes. We know that this film catapulted Ray into the international arena. It went on to win a slew of awards, including Best Human Document in Cannes Festival. And yes, there were detractors in India who accused Ray of exporting poverty to win prizes abroad. And the French author, Truffaut, famously walked out of a screening of Pather Panchali saying that I don't want to watch peasants eating with their hands. However, through the years since then, not only cinefans and critics, but filmmakers all over the world have paid tributes to Ray. And I mention a special comment from Mrinal Sen, the other visionary we are going to talk about. He says that Indian cinema came of age with Pather Panchali, the first film of Ray. And he said it at a time when he was completely brokenhearted, when his own film became a complete failure. That is generosity of spirit. I like the way Martin Scorsese sums up the Ray effect, recalling how he watched it 3 times, the entire Apu trilogy at one sitting. He says, the artistry, the filmmaking, it just took my breath away. It was poetic, immediate, sweeping, intimate, all at the same time. He also singled out one moment in that film saying, there's a remarkable close-up of the young boy Apu in Pather Panchali, and the way the cut works with a sudden burst of Ravi Shankar's music. For me, says Martin Scorsese, that was one of the precious, revelatory moments that you can have in a movie theater. And yes, Ray's work has had a lasting effect on my filmmaking. He's only one among many others. He also said that Ray was a filmmaker whom you should revisit often. And I think it's because Ray does not shout. He communicates not by direct, overt statements, but by subtle, half-hidden, furtive-seeming hints, I would say. We know that statements have only one meaning, but suggestions are like a kaleidoscope. You just shake it and you get a new design. And so it is with many films of Ray, not all, with many of them, we can claim and reclaim new meanings in different times and in different places. Often, it has been my experience that what seems completely outdated at one time can suddenly be, voila, reinterpreted and freshly revalued to yield a completely new meaning. Even his images acquire new meanings today. Ray's trains have always been traditionally meant to suggest anticipation, hope, the onward march of modernity and industrialization, which was so dear to the heart of our cherished prime minister of those times, Jawaharlal Nehru. But last year, when we watched millions of migrant workers in our virus devastated times, we have seen, and we are seeing, what Ray shows in many of his films, how the basic human struggle for survival, every force is ranged against the poor, the powerless, and the have-nots. Again, the pandemic has also infected people with hatred for and fear of science, logic, intellectual inquiry. In some of his films, Ray has shown very clearly how religious bigotry can completely infect the mind to become mindless, and how extreme conservatism can blind people to science, to rationalism, and to progressive values. Now, what do I personally find singular and exceptional in Ray's films? Ray hardly ventured outside his own culture, his own language, and his own state. But he harnessed cinema to refract Indian life as never seen before, perhaps never equaled since. In doing this, he became universal and timeless, and I cherish that. Few can direct children as Ray has done. The naturalness of children in Ray's films always astonishes you. How did he get this effect from child actors? Uma Dasgupta, who played the role of Durga in Pather Panchali, told me that Ray never treated children different from the way he treated adults. And he never gave them instructions in the presence of other people. Whatever he wanted them to do, he whispered to them exclusively so that the child felt that there was a secret that he was sharing with Ray. And Uma said, he was my friend. I wanted to please him. Whether he planned it or not, this is the third point that I love, whether he planned it or not, the way he presented women in his films enhanced their stature. And Ray registers his repulsion for patriarchy, which is a definite social comment in his films. The way Ray captures expressions on the human face, long-held expressions which are epic tales themselves. But I love the the fleeting expressions that come and go, now here, now there, now gone, those expressions tease me out of thought. And in thinking about them, I become a participant in Ray's films. I become a co-creator with Ray. Ray takes indirection to completely new levels. And I want to give one example here because we don't have much time. I took my mother to see Apur Sansar. She's not a film buff and she hardly sees any films, let alone Bengali films. She was completely transported by, my mother's a dancer, I should explain. So she was completely transported by a particular scene where a young couple are spending the night in their house in the city. And the bride, she's cooking in the kitchen and the husband has just woken up after their first night together. And he sees her hairpin on the bed. The way he picks up the hairpin and looks at it and caresses that hairpin and holds it against his cheek. My mother said, I have never seen love expressed like this, with this kind of depth, intensity, passion, and tenderness and sensitivity. This is real Shringara, she said. And many years later, I saw an Iranian film called Baran, where the filmmaker had paid tribute to Ray by using the same image of the hairpin to show the love of a man for a woman. Now, Ray, I interviewed Ray in the one that I want to talk about is the one in December 1992. He was under strict medical supervision for his heart ailments, and just 4 months later, he was to pass away. And though he had received India's highest civilian award, Bharat Ratna, much before, and a few days later, the Oscar was going to be announced for him as a lifetime achievement. This was a time when Ray's preeminence as a filmmaker was being questioned by young people and young critics. Just before meeting Ray, the Bengali filmmaker Buddhadev Dasgupta had told me, I don't class Ray with Akira Kurosawa or Bergman or with Mizoguchi. Cinema for Ray is not what it is for them, which is something between poetry and music. India has not seen that kind of film yet, he said. Now, several other Indian filmmakers and critics, as I told you, found Ray's values extremely old-fashioned and dated. His outlook on contemporary issues they thought was very naive. This was worsened by the box office failure of Ganashatru in 1989, Shakha Prashakha, one of his last films, and the last film, Agantuk. Mrinal Sen, who came to see the screening, told Ray that he loved the film, or so Ray said. But when I checked it with Mrinal Babu, he said, I like the script. I'm not talking about the whole film. So you see, there was a completely different kind of approach towards Ray at that time. The avant-garde heartbreaker had come to be viewed as an established traditionalist. Ray had always been a traditionalist. He'd never been an iconoclast like Mrinal Sen and breaking form and, freaking out with experiments. So I went to see him with this thought in mind, is Ray too slow to grasp today's disillusionments and tomorrow's impulsions? I will share his answer with you. My question was, early in your career, you focused on individuals. Later, your canvas widened to include issues like unemployment, alienation, corruption, changing values, and so on. But you have never deviated from the code of absolute values, which you've set for yourself. Isn't your stance of rigid moral rectitude somewhat dated? He answered, when I made films about city dwellers, jobless men, or overambitious men, I could not ignore the issues that affect people in an urban context. But you have to accept me as I am. If you draw conclusions from the films, then obviously you're drawing conclusions about the man who made them. I'm not a prude, but I think my films do reflect my preference for right conduct, upright lifestyle, and psychological attitudes and human relationships that I consider admirable and those I do not. I asked him, your last 4 films evoke absolute desolation in the branches of the tree, Shakha Prashakha. The brain-damaged son becomes the true inheritor of his father's virtues, as he has been rendered incorruptible by his mental affliction. Is this your perception of reality today? And he said, well, almost. Looking around me, I feel that the old values of personal integrity, loyalty, liberalism, rationalism, fair play, everything is completely gone. People accept corruption as a way of life, as a necessary evil. In acquiring material comforts, you grow numb with a sense of placid acceptance. Maybe you resist in the beginning, but the internal and external pressures crowd to a point where you learn to overlook the moral decline as well. In the branches of the tree, the younger son's qualms are not quelled by a colleague's advice. He tries to escape the net to walk the straight line, but we do not know whether he can successfully insulate himself against the pervasive infection, the pervasive disease. The father says to the mentally deranged son, "You are the only one I have." Bleak, you say, but uplifting, don't you think? I didn't, but I didn't say it. And I asked him my last question, which was, it just came out. I said, you have described yourself as an atheist, as an agnostic. Do prayer, worship, rituals, and faith mean nothing to you? Remember that Ray was extremely sick at that time, visibly sick. And he said, no, they are a part of the phenomena I cannot explain, areas where human knowledge has yet not penetrated. But I have a grandson now. Watching him makes me realize how complex the evolution of human life has been. There is a master plan, an order in it. Whether it is the work of a bearded god or a thundering messiah, I don't know. And I couldn't help making this remark. As you grow older, is it not comforting to believe in God? How can you be contented without that? How can you find contentment without that? Ray, who was reclining on an easy chair, sat up straight, absolute ramrod straight, and he said, no, I don't need comfort. I have my fulfillment, my elation from the work I do. Am I content? More than that, much more than that. Friends, I don't want to label Satyajit Ray as political or apolitical, avant-garde, idealist, traditionalist, classicist, rationalist, humanist. I don't want to do any of those things. I think Ray's films do what the best works of art do. They foresee, they prophesy, they warn us, they highlight our individual responsibility in times of suffering. They resist injustice. They speak up for the downtrodden, and they teach us to empathize with fellow creatures, fellow human beings. In doing so, they give us courage and confidence to resist injustice, corruption, and they also offer solace, hope, and possibilities for human bonding. In a world that today I see is challenging us, threatening to overwhelm us. Thank you. And now I'm waiting to hear what Kunal Sen is going to say about his extraordinary, visionary father.
Thank you, Gowri, and thank you, Kalapriya, for giving me this opportunity. So I'm supposed to talk about my father, which is a little awkward because I can't be that remote. I mean, after all, he's my father. I'm intimate with him. And even though I do have, like any viewer, I have very strong opinion about the films that he made and Satyajit Ray made or Ritwik Ghatak made. But I'll try to stay away from commenting on individual films, but sort of as a viewer, as an independent viewer, what I saw in them. So before I talk about my father, I would like to mention how I see their trajectory as this three people as individuals. So Ray was very distinct um, from my father and Ghatak. They were all, by the way, they all started, it's kind of interesting that they all started almost the same time. They all made their first films in the early 50s. They were born within 4 years of each other. So they were truly contemporary, working in the same city, same studio, same environment. However, Ray's entry into film, his motivation from what I've read, what we have read from his writings, his own interviews, he was primarily interested for a long time to make films. It was the art form that attracted him. And so he practiced that in his mind. Even before he made his first film, he was practicing it for a long, long time, mentally simulating the process of making a film. And as a result, which is very surprising, that even his very first film is incredibly sophisticated. It's extremely well made. You cannot watch Pathet Pachali and think that this is somebody's first film. He didn't even go to a film school. This is literally his first film. The cameraman, he has never held a movie camera, Subrata Mitra, and he's probably one of the best cinematographer that we have seen. Whereas for both my father and Ghatak, the motivation came from elsewhere. The main motivation was they wanted to say something. So the subject matter and the desire to say something was the main motivator, and they chose cinema as a medium because they felt that this is a mass medium. This is how they can tell their story, their point most effectively. So both of them, when they came into film, they were nowhere near as prepared. In fact, my father made his first film almost the same time. It's a film called Radhpur, which doesn't exist anymore. And my father couldn't have been happier that it didn't, because he absolutely hated the film. The moment it came out, he was disgusted by the film. He convinced himself that he doesn't have what it takes to make a film. And he didn't. I mean, he didn't know how to make a film then. And it was a slow process of gradually learning. If you watch Ghatak's first film called Nagorik, it's the same thing. It's a very, as a filmmaking, it was weak. It was almost, I would venture to say it's almost amateurish. I mean, both of them. So they both learned in the process of telling their story, whereas Ray came in with a full grasp of the medium. So my father, that was a disaster. He almost thought that he will never make a film again. And then he made the second film, Baisha Shravan, which was slightly, he liked the film better. He liked the subject, he liked his making of it. It also got the first film that got some international exposure. But still, for the next several films, his structure of the filmmaking was very conventional. This is exactly how all other films were made. The difference was in the subject matter. His subject matters were what he wanted to say. They were, I think, even in today's perspective, they're progressive. He dealt with a divorcee, which was not a issue that was easily dealt in those days, in the early 60s, late 50s. His third film was about a Chinese hawker and his relationship with an Indian woman, not a romantic relationship, but called Nilakash Niche. So the subjects were interesting and different, but the making was conventional. But he was clearly not happy with, he wanted his own language that he could use. And the first film where that glimpse of that language came out was called Akash Kushum. This was in the mid 60s, he made that film. And it created, I mean, the language was, he was seeing a lot of French film at that time. He was clearly influenced by the French New Wave, and that came through in this film. There was an interesting event that happened after that film. One of the local daily newspapers, Statesman, did a good review, positive review of that film. And for some reason, which I still don't completely understand, Satyajit Ray then responded to that and wrote sent a letter to the editor of Statesman, saying that this is a film that is a conventional story, conventional film, just packaged in a new kind of package, and that created a storm of letters. So my father and Ray debated each other, and many other people joined in that debate. So it lasted for almost more than a month, almost 50 days. And finally, the editor of Statesman had to say that we will not take any more letters on this topic. So then after that, there was another film he made in Oriya called Mati Ramanisha. By the way, my father made films in many different languages, and not because he wanted to, but that's how he could get his funding. His primary principle of filmmaking was, if there is one common thing he believed till the end, was to make films at a very low budget, because he believed that the only way he can maintain his creative freedom is by keeping the budget of the film as low as possible, because there is always that implicit pressure that you have to return the investment, and the more money you take, the more pressure to satisfy a larger audience and get the money back. So he strongly believed in low budget films, and none of his films, most of them, didn't make any money. So then after Akash Kushum, the biggest breakthrough happened with a film called Bhuvan Shom, which for me, according to many people, it was the start of what is known as the Indian New Wave, where he took entirely new crew of people who were new to the film, and the language of this film still feels, at least to me, extremely fresh. And this was also the film that gave him national exposure, international exposure. And from that point onwards, it was slightly easier for him to get funding for his films. But towards the end, when his films were still not popular in the box office, but whoever financed it knew that they can get their money back from international sales. And so I remember multiple conversations where somebody towards his end of his career would come to him with a bigger producer, a bigger financial house, with a proposal to make a film. But their condition was that he has to spend more money. It has to be a bigger budget film, because a bigger budget film implies that it'll be higher technical quality and better film stars, etc. And it was hilarious to see this reverse bargaining that went on between him and the producer, because he would always try to bargain them down, saying, no, I don't want to spend that much money. So anyway, right after Bhuvan Shom, there was a phase when he made extremely political films. He was always driven by the pressure of time. That is, whatever was happening in the world around him always was a big motivator for him. So at that time, if those who know, late 60s, early 70s throughout the world was politically, it was a very turbulent time, especially in Calcutta, where there was huge amount of political events happening, very violent events, and it was almost unescapable. So he made a series of films, and where the form was extremely different, experimental, and that's when he started drifting away from heavy storylines. His films became less dependent on stories or a heavy storyline, but more on an incident or an idea. And since then, he started making films which are basically idea-based and not necessarily story-based. After the political phase of his film, there was a famous Calcutta trilogy at that time that he made on Calcutta about political issues. Then his next phase is, to me and to many people, is probably his most creative phase, where instead of pointing the ills of society to something outside, which were his political film, as a socioeconomic explanation of the ills, he pointed the arrow towards himself, to his own class, to the middle class. And he made 3 or 4 films at that time where a common theme connecting them was the most dramatic event of the film happens before the film. So it's not part of the film. A servant boy dies. You don't see that person. Or the story of one evening or one night when the only money-earning daughter in a joint family doesn't come back home. And we never come to know why, but that it's the after effect of that on people around in that milieu. Finally, his last 10 years, his filmmaking became more sparse, and he started becoming even more experimental. There was one film where the man and the woman only talk on the phone. They never meet. There was a film called Genesis, which was rarely seen, which was a fable-like thing, but based on purely a Marxist interpretation of relationship. It hardly had any story. So that's roughly his entire trajectory. And now I can hand it over to Gowri, and both of us will be there, and we'll talk about Ghatak.
It was lovely to hear you talk about your father. I kind of relived the films and relived meeting him, and what a charming man he was. You know, what a handsome.
He loved talking.
Oh yeah,
he loved talking.
Absolutely, absolutely. So he was a journalist's delight. I can tell you that. You know, because he was so articulate and he would speak so, what shall I say, with such warmth and bluntness and, you know, no holds barred. Well, anyway, now we talk about Ritwik Ghatak, a filmmaker whom I have not, I've seen his films, I have not seen at all, and I have not met him. He died at the age of 50. He was born in 1925 and died in 1976. You know, there are some people who are fated to remain unrecognized while they are alive. They have to die to be known. So it was with Ritwik Kumar Ghatak to a great extent. He was a playwright, a screenwriter, a film director, and all those of you who have seen Ritwik Ghatak's films and those of you who will see his films will agree with me when you see them that the word visionary is something that it's a perfect fit for him. Many of the Indian and the world film fraternity who hail Ghatak as the greatest filmmaker of India say that he is far above every other filmmaker in India, every part of India. All those who won international celebrityhood are nowhere near him. So he has that kind of adoring fans. But he was a very interesting figure. Ghatak was involved in many controversies. As a member of the Communist Party, he made great contributions to theatre and cinema through the cultural wing of the party, the Indian People's Theatre Association, And among them was a landmark play called Navanna, about which I've heard so much. I didn't know that he was involved, that Ritwik Ghatak was involved in that play. It was about the Great Bengal Famine, which was a man-made situation where 2 million people died of starvation and disease. Eventually, he was expelled from the party. So it tells you something about him. Ghatak was also an assistant director to a film called Chinnamol, which was made in 1950. And it is important for us to know that, because many people in Bengal think that it was, I haven't seen it, but that it is a precursor to Pather Panchali. And it had the same kind of style and substance, the same kind of stark documentarist, neo-realist filmmaking that Ray got credit for pioneering, but it had already been done before him. Ghatak's Nagarik, which Kunal Sen mentioned, is in the same mold, and it preceded Ray's debut film. In fact, it was seen only after his death. Now, Ghatak could be a very difficult man, I'm told, and his clashing with the Indian government makes a very interesting story. And it tells you something about the nature of the man, and which tells you why he made the films the way he did. The government was aghast when the question was raised in the Indian Parliament by a member about a national award given to Ritwik Ghatak, because Ghatak had called Mahatma Gandhi a pig, and this was published in a university journal. Now, Ghatak issued a statement immediately saying that he had indulged in some loose talk with students. Yes, he had done that, but he had just been discharged from the hospital after undergoing a severe mental illness, and he was not himself. And anyway, the government, this was a letter that he sent to the ministry. This, in any case, the criteria of giving an award to an artist was to be found in his creative work, not in his political utterances or any loose talk that he may indulge in. I thought that was fantastic. And so, but the government actually, he also cited an example of his film, Suvarna Rekha, which is a classic of its kind, and The Golden Lining. And there he says, I used the image of the dying flame on the funeral pyre of Mahatma Gandhi as a symbol of the fact that the nation has completely lost its grace and it is falling towards peril and perdition. The government actually accepted this explanation and announced that they would not take the award back. And I quote their letter now, which says, as Gandhi himself would have forgiven Ghatak's trespasses and recognized his creative talent. I don't know if any government today will do these things, because I think we are now in a very different world altogether. There's a bit more to the story. In the year of Gandhi's centenary, what do you think Ritwik Ghatak did? In the year of Gandhi's centenary, he made a short called Amar Lenin, where he exalted the Russian leader as the greatest political figure of the century. The combined efforts of artists and intellectuals in his home state, Bengal, was required. This included Satyajit Ray and Mrinal Sen. All their endorsement was needed in order to get Ghatak's film past the censors and get it certified for release. So now you have an idea of the kind of person we are dealing with: volatile, maverick, alcoholic, impulsive. This gave him, of course, an aura of tragic, romantic, idealistic, and misunderstood hero. If you talk to his disciples, some of whom are very famous filmmakers now, this is the romantic idealist hero that they talk about. They don't talk about an ordinary man at all. Perhaps his unpredictability fueled his innovative and creative mind. Certainly, it brought overblown emotions to his films. So Ghatak did something absolutely unexpected, perhaps even unimaginable. He took the stylistic genre that is so dear to the Indian public, the tear-jerking melodrama, and transformed it into an intense, gut-wrenching tragedy in his films. Interestingly, Ghatak had written a screenplay for one of the greatest potboilers of the Bollywood film industry, though it was made by a great Bengali director called Bimal Roy. It was a potboiler on the reincarnation theme, if you please, and with Bollywood stars playing the lead. This was a film called Madhumati, which is still remembered, and which became a trendsetter in many Indian languages. Ghatak was anguished by the horror of the partition, and his films bear testimony to his pain and to his trauma. His refugee trilogy, as some people call it, Meghe Dhake Tara, Cloud-Capped Star, Komal Gandhar, which is the name of a musical note, Subarna Rekha, as I already mentioned, The Golden Lining, they remain gems, absolute gems of angst and loss and statelessness and just desolation. Of course, Ritwik Ghatak's films failed commercially in India, and they were trounced by critics, including Party Comrades. And he was not able to depict the themes of dislocation and loss of identity and social crisis and psychological trauma to an international audience with the elegance and style of a Satyajit Ray, or the energy and robustness and determination of a Mrinal Sen. So it has been left to posterity to discover Ritwik Ghatak's creative genius. There's no mistaking it though. What you see, what you cannot mistake in his films is his genuine involvement in the fate of his deprived fellow human beings, his strong feminist stance, his anxieties about social situations, his uncompromising denunciation of the hypocrisies in his own party, got him expelled, and his ability to bring out the best from actors as a filmmaker. He developed his craft skills, as Kunal Sen said. He developed them from scratch, and he developed them in a way that would best serve his purpose, to make his brand, his style of filmmaking. Personally, I find Ghatak's handling of music to be something that takes his films to another level altogether. We talk about Satyajit Ray composing films and his being a connoisseur of, composing his music and being a connoisseur of music. But I think there is something uncanny about the way Ritwik Ghatak uses music in his films. And music becomes an intense and subliminal force to communicate the filmmaker's extremely complex thoughts and emotions, which appear to be very simple and melodramatic, but they are complex. Whether he narrates the saga of an artist, as he does in Meghe Dhake Tara, or the story of an automobile in Ajantrik. It was made before that famous film on the automobile. I forget its name. I think it's an American film that was made. So in Ghatak, music is magic. And I do hope that all of you will get to enjoy that magic of Ghatak in his music and every other aspect of his filmmaking. He continues to inspire Indian cinema through his disciples and followers, the filmmakers who make films with passion as a serious pursuit. And I may end by saying something that Madhavi Mukherjee, who played the lead role in many of Satyajit Ray's films, the lonely wife is a portrayal that we cannot forget. Madhavi Mukherjee said to me that she has acted in several films of Ghatak, and she told me that one day, I believe she asked him, Dada, your films are flopping one after the other. Nobody's saying a good word for you. You're wasting your energy, your time, and then, you're feeling depressed because your films are failing. Why do you make films? Why don't you stop and do something else? They're flopping continuously. And I believe Ghatak just looked at her in the eye and said, no, my films are not flopping. The audience is flopping. So let us not flop now. Let us learn to enjoy and appreciate this great filmmakers' extraordinary works of cinema. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Kunal Sen.
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring up that play. Yes, Ritwik Ghatak came into cinema. Before that, he was a theater person. And in fact, my mother played in that play before they were, my father and my mother were married. And she also, she played in his first film, Nagorik. My mother was there. I mean, she had a different last name then, Gita Shom. Um, but I can see actually that theater in Ghatak, in Ozil's films. His films are essentially very theatrical. What some people call it melodramatic, that all the characters, all the events, all of their reactions are slightly larger than life. They're not realistic. I mean, if you look at any of his films, the characters don't behave the way you would expect a real person to behave. Their reactions, their expressions, the events, everything is slightly larger than life. And I think that was the theater persona in him that comes in. Even the dialogues are sometimes very, very theatrical dialogue.
Yeah. Okay. And I always found it interesting that Soumitra Chatterjee is so different in Ritwik Ghatak's films than from the films of Ray.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think they're very different aesthetics. I mean, if you really like the aesthetics of Ray and to some extent my father's, it's so extremely different from the aesthetics of Ray. One is understated. Ray is extremely understated. My father later on in his more mature phase was also making very understated films where things are not underlined. Whereas Ghatak's style was underlining things and making it bold. So yes, Soumitra Chatterjee had a persona. I mean, Ritwik Ghatak was a difficult person to deal with. I mean, my personal interaction with him when I remember, which is in my high school and college days, were always personally very, very negative. I mean, I have seen him almost always drunk and a difficult person to deal with. He will come to our house and these were not pleasant memories. I mean, I would rather not think of those memories, but that's what stays. So he rubbed many people the wrong way in his personal interaction. He was very rough, and so I can understand Soumitra Chatterjee's reaction to his films and him as a person. Okay, so should we go into, since we are already over time, question and answer?
I want to thank you both for such an exciting conversation. And we have a number of questions, and I'm trying to figure out the sequence in which we can take it. There is one person has made a statement that Soumitra Chatterjee didn't act in any.
He's right. He's actually right. He's right. I'm sorry. I was thinking of Soumitra Chatterjee in several other films, and he stands out in Ray, and he looks so. The way he enacts in other people's films is very different. I think he was Ray's favorite actor, right? So when he's right, he did not act in this one.
He didn't act in Ghatak's films. Okay. Here's a question for you, Kunal. Was Mrinal Sen a pessimist in his stories? If yes, was it deliberate?
I wouldn't call him a pessimist by any stretch of imagination. I think he was annoyed by the state of things. He was really deeply affected by how things are in society, and he tried to fight that in any possible way that he could by exposing it. He faced this question. I mean, I remember during the Calcutta trilogy, he showed his film in some international location, I think in Germany, and in the audience was the Indian ambassador or consul general, I think an ambassador in that country. And right after the film, I mean, this ambassador stood up and said, well, we saw this film, but the real situation in India is much better. We are doing, and he started giving statistics of how much quintillions of rice we produce, and then all our industrial output, etc. So again, the criticism was that, is he trying to show a negative aspect of our society? And it was not. I mean, he wanted to face the reality. He wanted to talk about poverty, and poverty is something that you just really cannot avoid in Indian context. He made a film called Akale Shandhane, which is about the 43 famine that Gowri mentioned in talking about Ghatak. And there again, it's about a film within a film. The film is being made in the 80s about the famine. And the theme comes back that poverty is there. It was always there, and it's still there in India. In terms of, so psychologically, I don't think he was pessimistic. And as a person, he was not at all. He was always very energetic and positive.
There is a little train here of conversation about Madhavi Mukherjee did just one film with Ghatak. Subarnalekha Ghatak had offered Komal Gandhar to Madhavi, but she refused.
She refused. I remember this Soumitra Chatterjee in a different context, and I got a little confused. But Soumitra Chatterjee punched Ritwik Ghatak in the nose.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. They had a big fight because Ritwik Ghatak was totally drunk and he was bad-mouthing Satyajit Ray. And finally, Soumitra Chatterjee could not bear it and he punched him and said, you know. So I remember that story, and I think I just got to know how different he looks. Yeah.
You know, in our I'm going to interject with one of my own questions. In our conversations, I have seen that, you know, you grew up, this is addressed to Kunal, you grew up, Kunal, with in a family where I guess your father was friends with both Ray and with Ghatak, and they also had sons, and you told me some things about that. That would be interesting to the audience, I think.
Yes, it's kind of coincidental that all three of these people have one son, and all of them are nicknamed Babu. In India, as you know, everyone has a nickname. So we are all called Babu. And Babu is probably the most unimaginative name you can think of. So it sort of shows how much of their creative energy they wanted to spend on naming their son. Or their respective sons. Yeah, I mean, they were all very close, and whatever apparent distance that you see, of course, what is really interesting to me that these three directors, they worked side by side at the same time, and yet they could not have been different than each other. There was hardly any, you don't see direct influence of one on the other. They remain fiercely independent. And that sort of shows their respective confidence in whatever they were doing. But there was tremendous respect. I think that the animosity that we sometimes see that, I mean, part of it is natural, that people should disagree. I mean, if you are a creative person, you should disagree. But to take it to a personal level was more the work. I mean, this is a very Indian thing, or maybe a very Bengali thing, that you have to belong to a camp. If you like Ray, then you have to dislike Mrinal Sen. Or if you like Mrinal Sen, I mean, there is an exclusive camp thing. And these people around them often stirred up more animosity than there really was. I think there was a lot more respect than any kind of negative feeling.
I don't fully understand this question from a Madhumati Datta. If chorus was groundbreaking, why was it?
That is, I mean, I don't really want to talk about the aesthetic quality of my father's films because it's hard for me to be impartial. But the problem is, even if I am, no one will see it that way. People will always see it through the lens that I'm talking about my father. Chorus, I personally think it was a really unusual film for its structure. It was structurally so very different from a narrative story, that you take an idea that of joblessness and people applying, and the way he conceived it, because he saw a headline in a newspaper that there was some job opening, probably a government job or a private sector job, and there were only 100 openings, and there was a line or applicant line of 33,000 people, and that struck him as something unusual. And the whole story, the whole film was built on that one newspaper headline.
But that is like passionate activism.
Yeah.
And I think many activists today would appreciate that.
Also, I think we need to have a different perspective to look at some of the films that, most of the films that Mrinal Sen did, because I think his purpose was also to break the well-made plot and the well-made structure. So I think we have to now look at it from the point of view of the craft and to what extent that craft works. I think we have to it's like, if you're listening to Amir Khan, you have to have a completely different perspective than when you're listening to Pandit Jasraj. It's like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I think also people are looking for that answers to life questions which are not there. Here's another question. I'm wondering how their individual experiences more specifically informed aspects of their film styles. You had mentioned things like musical aesthetics and theatrical training in passing, which were really insightful. That led me to wonder how we can better differentiate and appreciate their work as it translated more concretely into cinematic framing, sound and score, or screenplay writing. This is a musician, Bertie Cabrera from the University of Chicago.
Gowri, it's closer to you.
I'm not, I haven't really completely understood the question. I lost it somewhere because it's kind of long and.
But things like musical aesthetics and theatrical training.
See, theatrical training, I don't know. Ray did not have any theatrical training, I think, but he watched films, but I don't think any critics see any impact of theater in his work. But music, yes, because, there was something very interesting. He said, I was asking him about, this was in some interview. I was asking about why is it that you were not so very involved in the political turbulence of Bengal. I mean, young people in Bengal are always involved in politics, right? So you're such an intelligent man. All intelligent people, intellectuals were involved. So why weren't you? And he said, I was listening to Beethoven and I was lost in a completely different world of music. I couldn't come back to the real world, he said. And so I went into a phase when, I was listening to Beethoven and I just got, So that I thought was a very strange answer then. But now I realize that Ray must have drawn a lot of his aesthetics from the music that he loved. He loved Western music as well as Indian music. But interestingly, the music that he himself composed seems to be very strongly based on the folk music of Bengal. And so after all this journey through Beethoven, Bach and Mozart and, all kinds of things, and then all the great Hindustani, Vilayat Khan Sahab and everyone, Ravi Shankar, finally comes to the folk music as the pulse of his land, the pulse that runs in his blood. I think that it's fascinating.
Yeah, in fact, that comes out almost directly in an episode in Gupi Gayan Bhagavan, where there is this musical competition going on, and you hear all this different genre of Indian classical music being played, and really well played. And finally, this two characters, the protagonists, come up with a simple Bengali folk tune and win the competition. So
yeah.
So I yeah.
That's interesting. There's another gentleman here who says Ray adapted Ibsen's play Enemy of the People in Ganashatru.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's fundamentally misconceived to see Ray as an apolitical filmmaker. I don't know if...
No, but, he was not directly involved in politics, and I think nobody can make films or even exist or breathe without breathing in politics. It's not possible. It's not possible at all, because man, woman, human beings are political animals. But he was not overtly political, particularly when you look at his contemporaries, serious contemporaries in Bengal. He didn't belong to he had no party affiliations, vaguely left, Fabian socialist kind of thing. So that's it.
Well, we have a few more questions, but I think it may be time to close it. What do you think, Alison? We're running into...
I think that we can take just the couple left, because
Okay.
everyone here is engaged.
Okay, good. Just you guide us, okay? There's a gentleman here who wonders whether the films that show personal struggles, mental conflicts of character, did Sen suffer from personal struggles which may have influenced his films? And the films he's referring to are Ek Din Achanak, Akelar Sandhane. I'm sorry,
Yeah. No, that's all right. I think, yes, both of these, I think all works of art are ultimately autobiographical. I mean, how can you create something that you didn't experience? But these two particular films are particularly more obviously autobiographical. I think I've heard my father say about Ek Din Achanak, where you see this in the very beginning of the film, otherwise successful elderly professor, one day he just walks out of his home, and the rest of the film is about the reaction. And it was primarily a film about mediocrity. And my father told me many times how he feels himself mediocre, and everyone is mediocre. No matter how successful you are, your level of mediocrity shifts. But I don't think anyone at some point cannot look at themselves and feel mediocre. And so this was his own crisis. And Akalesh Sandhane was more directly as a creative person that he always questioned this idea that as a creative person, you are selling your experience, you're selling your craft, but ultimately you're selling it. And how far can you stay to reality? Is reality really capturable? Can any creative artist capture reality? So these are complex questions, but yes, this is a crisis that he himself felt, and that came through in Akalesh Sandhane.
There's another question here. You mentioned that Ray has influenced many foreign filmmakers. Although Ray had no formal training as such, I believe he worked with Renoir on his film, The River. So he has, as well as foreign filmmakers. Can you speak to his influences that contributed to this aesthetic?
Yes. You want to take that, Kunal?
No,
yes,
why
he
did you?
Did work with Renoir.
Yeah.
He did work with Renoir. And if you see photo, I don't know all the details, but if you see Ray is one of the most photographed persons I know. You can see him with so many different filmmakers across the world. And what he got from them and what they got from him, we don't have accounts of everything.
I mean, there are anecdotes that he, even before he made film, he would watch a film, and he was particularly fond of the Hollywood style of Hollywood genre of filmmaking that you see in his filmmaking style. And he would come back home and then try to recreate the film in his own way. That how would he have told the same story? So he was practicing. He was constantly practicing in his mind.
He was. There was just something that was not a question, but the thought came to my mind, and I thought I would like to share it with you. Once Mrinal Sen told me about going back to Faridpur, which was your hometown in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So he went back, I believe. This was many years after they had been displaced from Faridpur and they'd been settled in Calcutta and so on. He and his wife, they went back. And they found it was an unforgettable experience because Faridpur had changed completely from what he knew. But he felt that he was standing in front of his own house like a foreigner. And then he says that people gathered around him in silence, him and Geetaji in silence. And I believe a smiling woman walked out of one of the houses and gave flowers to Geetaji. And then they said, Mrinal Sen's sister died early, and there is a memorial built for her near the river there. And I believe they said, we are taking care of the memorial, come. And they went to the memorial. The people who lived in that house where Mrinal Sen had lived, they'd taken the responsibility of maintaining the memorial of the person, the girl who stayed there and who died there and was buried there. I think that is.
I heard that story.
Yeah, and he, what I heard was, he said that I realized that partition, anything can happen, but people do not lose their humanity. And so I realized that was a big thing that I learned, he said. But I thought, that all his life, Mrinal Sen was aware of this humanity. And in all his films, it seems to me that he is agonized over the loss of this humanity, and he's fighting the forces that obstruct this humanity. Whereas I feel that Satyajit Ray is searching to show us that humanity. Yes, I feel that there is a difference, a complete, both of them are humanitarian and look, that's their concern, but there are different points of view.
Yeah. No,
There's a
there is also a interesting, so for example, Ray's whole view was based on the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, that knowledge and everything expands the world, and then we are in a better place. So I read somebody's article, which was very insightful, that when we see the train sequence in Pather Panchali, which is the train, these two young boys in a village are watching this train go by, and it was a symbol of connection of the larger world and everything positive. And then in Ghatak's Meghe Katara, the train comes back again and again, and there it comes with a message of ill omen of industrialization, of bad things happening to our world. So it's kind of the same symbolism, but it affected two different people in extremely different ways.
They're asking me to wrap up, but I have one question which I wanted to ask, and I think it may be a good one to end with that. And that is, what personally attracts you to these filmmakers today? Which aspect of their filmmaking do you cherish the most? And especially Gowri, who's a playwright and a play producer. I wonder whether you go back to them. And before we end, I want to tell you that there are some links, and there's the Criterion channel, which is showing some of these films, and we will send the links out, to you on some of these articles and so on, which has been put here by Mr. Purukayashta. So I would like you to end with your personal, what you value from these three filmmakers, and then we will call it a day.
Kunalji.
Why don't you go first?
I love the elegance in Ray. I love the energy in Mrinal Sen. And I love the magic in Ritwik Ghatak.
Wow, you're so eloquent.
Yeah, I think what I find instructive and attractive in these three filmmakers is the groundbreaking that they all three tried to do something that has not been done before, and that's what drew the attention of the international audience in their own way. They triggered a sense of imagination in people because they saw something that surprised them. And that's one thing that I often wonder why, and I don't know the answer, but the reality is, so let's say the most respected film festival even today is Cannes Film Festival. While these people were alive, especially Ray and my father, their films, almost many of their films were shown in the competition out there. In the 80s, 3 of my father's films were in Cannes competition. Since 85, since my father's last film, not a single Indian film has entered Cannes competition. Why is that? And there got to be some reason. Now, one possibility is that the international interest has shifted. It's political, but that's hard to explain. I mean, there has to be something that made this transition, that from 1985 to 2021, we haven't seen a single Indian film in Cannes competition section. And my personal theory is that the really good films are being made, but they are not surprising films. They're not surprising the audience in some way that they didn't expect. And that's where I think these people still remain interesting, because they surprise the audience.
Thank you so much. You know that last year, in 2019, they recognized Ritwik Ghatak. You know, after all.
Yes, in Lincoln Center. Yeah, that was great.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's been a great afternoon. And I invite all of the people who attended to keep in touch. We will bring some more exciting programs like this. Next month, we are going to be showcasing some of our dancers. Thank you again, and stay connected.